What's going to cause my property to fail the healthy home standards? Hi, I'm Ed McKnight from Opes Partners, where we help you become a successful property investor right here in New Zealand. And if you are investing in property, you've probably heard about the healthy home standards. These come in from the 1st of July 2021, and if you sign a new tenancy agreement, your property has to meet these 5 standards: drafts, drainage, heating, ventilation, and insulation. So what we're going to go through in today's video is which ones of these your property is most likely to fail on and what you can do to make sure that it passes these standards. Now, here at Opes Partners, we have a sister company called Venture Management, and they're a property management firm which deals with properties all around New Zealand. Now, each of their properties has had to go through a professional third-party healthy homes assessment to find out, well, which of these standards does each property fail on? Now, we've crunched the data on 294 properties, going through each assessment to find out why they failed. And here's the thing, 49.2% of those properties failed on the draft stopping standard. That was closely followed by insulation, followed by heating, ventilation, and drainage. And even though drainage is only 26.5%, that's still more than a quarter of properties failing on the drainage standard. Only 14.7%, under 15% of properties complied from day one, didn't need any remedial work. Now you're probably thinking, Ed, surely these properties aren't going to be of any sufficient quality if only 15% of them are complying from day one. Well, actually, most of the properties that Venture manages are relatively brand new. The vast majority have only been built in the last 10 years. So the key message there for you is that even if your property looks like it's in good nick, it can still fail one of these 5 quite stringent standards. So now let's go through each of the 5 standards and talk about why properties tend to fail on each of them. So number 1 is draft stopping. And so what the standard says is that a landlord must plug up any gaps or holes that cause noticeable drafts within a property. And that includes blocking up any unused open fireplaces or chimneys that are causing drafts. Now that makes a lot of sense, but where do properties tend to fail? Generally, if you've got an internal access garage, there could be a draft created underneath at the bottom of the door where cold air is getting through from the garage down the hallway and into a property. And that's what will generally cause a relatively new property to fail this standard. So if you're failing on the draft stopping standard, what do? Well, first of all, make sure that the internal access garage is actually what's causing you to fail the standard. And if that is the case, you'd introduce one of these draft stoppers. Now these usually cost, the materials will cost $30 to $40 on Trade Me or Mitre 10. Might cost $100, $120 if you're getting a handyman to install it. But you put one of these on, that'll stop the draft, you'll pass the standard. But remember, what's going to be required to meet the draft stopping standard is going to change depending on your property. So after talking about this on the Property Academy podcast, we had a listener text into us and say that her property failed for what? A cat door in the kitchen. So there were drafts coming through a cat door which caused that property to fail the healthy home standards. So it is going to be different for different properties. But first thing, find out what's causing the drafts. Second thing, make sure that you're fixing them. Now, the second standard that your property is most likely to fail on is insulation. Now, for insulation, there's what we call an R value. That stands for resistance value, which is a measure of how well this insulation resists heat or keeps heat within a property. Now, this is different around the country because some areas require a greater level of resistance, a higher R value, because they're cooler. That's the South Island and the middle of the North Island. Zone 2, which is the bottom half of the North Island, that has a slightly lower R value than here in the South Island. And then Auckland and Northland, that's got an even more relaxed standard because temperatures tend to be warmer. So you do need to figure out, A, what the R value is based on where you are in the country, how much insulation you're going to need, and then 2, what sort of insulation you've already got there. Now here's the thing with insulation. Over time it can compact or it can become less effective because there's mold or it's got wet, something along those lines. And so you may need a top up to that insulation to meet the new standards. Key thing here will be to get a professional healthy homes assessor to see how much insulation you've got right now, whether it's in the right place and whether you will require a top up to meet the new standards. The next standard is heating. And what you've got to do is you've got to be able to heat up your lounge to 18 degrees Celsius from the coldest day of the year in your region. Now, when I ran the numbers on one of my properties in Christchurch, I found that the minimum temperature, the coldest day of the year, is a -4 degrees Celsius. That's the middle of the night, somewhere in winter. And then you've got to have enough of these fixed heating appliances, so a heat pump or a wood burner or some panel heaters, to take that from -4 degrees Celsius up to 18 degrees, which is quite a bit. So sometimes some properties will need quite a few of these heat pumps. Now, when you run the numbers for your property, what you're going to get is a minimum kilowattage for the number of appliances you need, or the power of those appliances that you need. Now, the funny thing here is the kilowattage needed for an older property is often less than a modern property. Now, that sounds counterintuitive, but it's because of how it's calculated. So an older property usually has a door that closes the lounge off. Now, the standard only applies to that lounge. But in a more modern property, the lounges are open plan. So you've got your kitchen, your dining, your lounge. You've even in this case got an open area that goes up the stairs into an upstairs hallway. Now, for the healthy home standards, this whole area is considered the lounge, and therefore the heating appliances you have there, like your heat pumps, have to warm up that entire area to 18 degrees Celsius on the coldest day of the year. Now, that's why a more modern place often will need a greater kilowattage than an older place. Next up, we've got ventilation. Now, every bathroom and kitchen needs to have an extractor fan. So that's probably a range hood in your kitchen or a normal extractor fan in your bathroom. Now, if these have been installed after July 1st, 2019, then there are some minimum standards about how powerful these need to be. Before July the 1st, 2019, there are no standards about how powerful these need to be. The next part of this standard is how big the windows need to be in each part of the house. So there are minimum requirements about the size of the windows that can open and be fixed in an open position so that the property can be adequately ventilated. Now, what's going to cause you to fail the standard? Well, if you've got windows that can't open because they're fixed in that position, you're going to fail the standard. If those windows, you can open them, but they're not fixing in an open position, you're also going to fail the standard. Now, let me tell you a little story about how else you might fail the standard. So at Venture Management, we had a brand new property that failed on ventilation. Now, what had happened is a contractor had been up in the roof space, they'd trodden on the ducting, which takes the cooking air outside, and because it had tears in it, it no longer met the standard. So even if you think you're compliant, there may have been something within your property, a contractor slightly tweaked that went wrong that can cause you to fail these standards. And finally, we've got the moisture and drainage standard. Now, what this says is that your property can't regularly flood and you've got to have appropriate drainage so that water is directed out to an outward drain. Now, the main reason that your property might fail this standard is if there are leaves or foliage that have got into that drain are clogging it up and making it less effective. But here's the thing. Even if you as the landlord clear out any of that debris, the foliage, the leaves, and make the drains flow freely again, if they get clogged up, it's your responsibility as the landlord to clear that. It's not the tenant's responsibility legally in order to go there and take that out. So as property investors, we need to be thinking about the healthy home standards because only 14.7% of properties were compliant at Venture Management from day one. And of course, because the properties that Venture managers tend to be newer, we'd expect this number to be lower if we counted all rental properties in the country. The other reason you want to be thinking about this is if your property is not compliant and your tenant makes a complaint to the Tenancy Tribunal, you could be up for up to $4,000 as a fine, and that money goes to your tenant. Now, that makes us a bit nervous here at Opes Partners because that means that tenants are likely to pursue a complaint at the Tenancy Tribunal because they've got a financial incentive to. So we really want to be making sure that our homes are compliant with these standards.